All right, ladies and gentlemen. So tonight I'm just debating which one to do in my head. I think it's upper 50s, low 60s tonight. You know what's funny about doing this show is that obviously I have to draw from things that interest me, that hopefully interest you. But what's interesting about it, how the buzzword is interesting. Don't drink every time I say it. But the idea is, because we think about it and talk about it to a deep level, because the episodes are an hour to 2 hours long, what's interesting is that we thoroughly really destroy a topic. I mean, we really get in there and make it happen. And then your comments follow up, and anything I missed, you guys harvest, and I go make another episode and elaborate. And so it's interesting. I get out here and I'm thinking, damn, what the hell am I going to talk about? I got this really big yearning to do an episode. I got a few ideas. There's subject matters, right? We have NASA, we have some alien stuff, we have self-improvement stuff, which is very near and dear to me because I grew up with quite a bit of mentorship on how to be a human being, which is part of the theme of some of the self-improvement, but a lot of it's the mentoring that you never get from anyone unless you're really, really fortunate. So I try to pass anything that's worked for me to you. Then we have all the existential stuff, which I've done a tremendous amount. Right now I've got 436 and 437 queued. Both of them have been demonetized automatically, so I'm waiting for the review to come about. The Patreon people already have it, so they're going to be able to see it with no ads on there. And again, it's all a matter of principle. It's like, come on, guys. They automatically demonetize everything that I upload. Then I have to wait like a random amount of days before they get in there and flip the switch. I mean, these are like harmless subjects. Maybe I say a dirty word, but come on. They got kids slinging, fake feces and, women's sanitary products in bathrooms, getting full, double roll ads front and back. And they actually been pretty cool. They allow me to smoke cigars. That's not killing it. They allow me to curse, which, I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just a little emphasis on the subject matter. And I'll tell you what really fuels an episode. We're just going to do a little digression at the very beginning of this. You already know what the hell I'm doing, and I have no clue at this point. I may have 2 episode ideas. We'll throw them up and flip the coin here in just a second. I'm trying to see if pontificating at the beginning will actually create a better opportunity for both of us. But the 2 things that fuel my episodes the most is if I've had a day where I've been writing all day, and even though I've seen some friends, perhaps for dinner or for a cigar, the conversation never really happened. So nothing really stimulating happened for me. And so it's just like, anyone who likes to work out every day, if you don't work out, you want to do it. So I like to work out my brain. It's just like a absolutely mandatory thing. So the flip side of that is almost completely the opposite type of day. I've hung out with friends. We've cracked open some interesting subjects. We've had a good discussion. And then I realized that we haven't discussed it on the show. And so I come home and I'm like, man, I'm not jotting them down on my phone, on my Wunderlist app. By the way, that's a great app. It's spelled like the German wonder, WUNDER list. It's a great little app. So the 2 episodes I'm tossing around right now is thinking big, which is important. People, they have big goals, but that first step, that inceptual step, is always really tough. So I've got a lot of techniques to get you to that level and to prepare for it. Now, obviously, I've embedded a lot of that subject matter in other episodes, but it's always kind of hodgepodgey statements and not a fully dedicated episode, which is one thing I like to do, is kind of make 100 episodes. You touch on it a dozen times and within 100 episodes, and then I'm like, okay, we need to do 1 episode about that subject. The other one is managing patterns. We live in loops, and those loops are typically what can make our life wonderful or make our life mundane. And like I said in that previous episode, which I can't remember what I called it, but it's the episode that the reason why time speeds up for you as you get older is that your patterns start to repeat so badly that your life is completely boring to your brain. And that's why you need to do something interesting. Now, folks that live the normal traditional life of an American, Midwestern American, you get married, you have 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 kids, then you raise them, they go out, they have their kids, then you become a grandparent. You're so busy till the day you die, then they have kids, and you have your great-grandparent or great-great-grandkids, and then you expire one day, and you've lived a wonderful life, hopefully. Because we don't do that, we're able to now crawl inside of our homes, never go outside, never walk anywhere, never do anything. And so life can become boring. So you need to be aware that you have patterns that need to be managed. You need to actively manage them, change them. If you're totally content with your life, you don't need to do anything I'm suggesting. Then there's subjects I want to really, really do, but I'm still in the middle of researching. And then there's subjects that are like SpaceX, Elon Musk in general. This guy's a mystery. His companies are weird. He does really cool things. Sometimes he wins, sometimes he fails. I totally support either way. But there's a weird thing, we don't ever see those boosters land by pedestrians, right? Pedestrians are not allowed to see that. Only, staged folks. And I think I've only seen one landing filmed by a pedestrian, quasi, but they're always employees of NASA, they're employees of SpaceX. And so, what do you believe, right? I think we beat up the moon mission so much, I have to find another angle. Had a really good run earlier this year so far, or earlier this season. I don't want to sit there and repeat myself. I debate creating a kind of variety version of a single show and just bouncing all over the place. I've been watching a lot of stuff on YouTube, interesting channels that do a fairly decent job at things. Some that seem to they had a good idea and it's executed, poorly. And so I think, I could take that, probably make an hour and a half out of it easy. Some of them are follow-ups. What's really crawling up my back at this point for a subject matter in the super interesting realm for me is the Roswell crash. Because it's this weird linchpin of history that they've always attacked the Roswell crash. And what I mean by that is that they found this disc embedded in the ground, and man, the story has recently changed a lot. Like, talk about, what's really funny is the people that are covering up the crash constantly tell you that the individuals who are the witnesses of it, or the secondhand witnesses from their relatives, they're the liars, they're the ones that changed all their stories, but the one that's really changing the story is the government. And so, maybe let's take Roswell today. Since the original episode's doing really well, let's beat that up. I got a big ass stick, so I gotta get creative with this one. Somebody like you and I sitting on this patio having the discussion, just shooting it back and forth, and I'll imagine your questions and views. So just a little recap in case you haven't seen the Roswell episode, which is in season 2. Highly recommend you see it because it will open your eyes. Now, I do want to say that I put all of the links, and I mean every single one that I used to make the episode, down in the description. And last time I edited the description and tested those videos, probably 40 to 50% of them are on channels that have been turned off. And it's not a video that's been disabled due to copyright notice. It has been simply turned off. That's the notice I get. And I've run into ones where they have copyright strikes. You've all seen it, right? But in the summer of 1947, outside of Roswell, New Mexico, outside of the Roswell Air Force Base, a farmer finds this disc crashed into the ground. Now, every single eyewitness that I have ever heard talk about what state the disc was in, they've all been 100% consistent. The only thing that's different between their testimonies is that one has seen more of the details of its position in the ground. But I just watched something yesterday which tried to insinuate that vehicle was embedded in the ground several hundred feet. Like I think the guy said like 300 feet in the ground. Like it was a big giant chasm in the ground. That is unequivocally not what everyone said. It hit a ridge. One side of it was embedded in the dirt. And it didn't seem like they were saying that it was embedded like halfway or something. It was just a part of the edge was in the bridge, or in the ridge, excuse me. And that one side of it had blown open. And so you could kind of see inside, but it was pretty damaged. There's three aliens there. One's dead, very, very damaged, burned up. One is mortally wounded and dying and will eventually die. And one appears completely fine. And he's tending to his buddies. He has laid out 3 little blankets that seem to be of foil nature. And considering that we do the same thing for our fighter fighters, we have foil for a lot of different things because it reflects heat and all this other stuff. First family to run into the disc after the farmer had found a bunch of debris was a man, his nephew, I believe his brother, and his 8-year-old kid, like minimum group of people. And there's a great testimony from the 8-year-old kid who gave testimony, as he got older, so he wouldn't forget what he saw. And he said that he thought that the alien was a toy. And so he went over and sat next to it and put his hand on its left thigh. And as soon as he touched it, it moved because it's being touched. And it freaked him out. He was like, oh my God, this thing's alive. Runs behind his father's leg, grabs the leg, looking around the leg. Meanwhile, his father and his uncle were trying to talk to it in several different languages on Earth. Maybe like 2 or 3. Spanish and French and English, I think. But then the nephew's running around looking at the craft. An archaeologist shows up with 4 or 5 students, I think. And he and his students had seen it crash the night before. And he speaks like 4 to 6 languages or something, and he's going through that regiment with the alien, and nothing's happening. The military find this thing, and what do? They report in their newspaper, not on the cover page, I think it was like page 3, that they had found a flying saucer from outer space. And of course, the big brass find out, and they're like, well, you did what? So then you have 3 things that are happening here. We have, obviously, the ruling class are like, this is all going to be coveted stuff for us. The cover story for the internal staff is this will make the world panic. And the cover story for the outside world is it's a weather balloon. Now the sad thing is that of all the Air Force bases on planet Earth, Roswell, New Mexico's Air Force Base is the key cornerstone of weather balloon development and deployment, with top secret balloons that are sent way up in the air, weather balloons that are sent up there with big sensors arrays on them to sense echoes in space. If anyone detonates a nuclear bomb, they can kind of sense it. At least that's the story. It's fairly believable because all they have to do is put sensors up in the sky while we're doing our testing, which, Area 51 was a gigantic nuclear bomb test area before it became Area 51. And so they see the type of wave that comes off of one of these things, the very unique wave that comes off of a shock wave from an atom bomb or the TNT bombs or whatever. And so you just roll that algorithm down, if you sense even a hint of this very specific wave, someone has done that in the world. Okay, it makes sense. But the one thing that these individuals would never do is mistaken a weather balloon for a flying saucer. How do weather balloons come down, folks? How do they come down? They go way, way up. The atmospheric pressure no longer holds the balloon together. The hot air that's in the balloon finally ruptures the membrane, and all this electronics come back down to the ground. Of course, on around Earth, it would probably drift really far away from its launch point. But in my research, this is what was interesting. The numbers vary, but they're very high. The highest number I read was somewhere in the low 80% rate of weather balloons are never attempted to be recovered. They just go up and do whatever they do. They might fall in the ocean. They might fall in some farmer's field. They just wait for someone to report something weird in their land, and then the military comes and scoops it up. But a lot of times they said there's no attempt to recover these things, meaning no operation ever happens. The debris falls wherever it falls, and that's it. So they've got this thing. And of course, once you touch this third rail of Roswell, you get folks that are pragmatists, and they're like, well, nothing makes any sense because we don't have other UFOs anywhere else that they've seen, so this can't be UFO. It has to be the weather balloon or something else, covert aircraft. Then you have the more elaborate news story that's been sort of surfacing, and I finally saw a very detailed version of this other story. And it is probably as outrageous as Hitler going down to the South Pole and building a gigantic base at the South Pole. Meanwhile, also waging one of the biggest world wars per capita of a size of a country in world history, right? You've got X amount of Nazis, X amount of people that can be conscripted into his army, and he's got time to go down south and put together this gigantic base. If he did, it would be something that we would easily find down there. There wouldn't be this, find the dome wall, talk to the dome owners. If he did that, I doubt he would have lost the war, right? I mean, you would have supernatural capabilities of some sort. And he wouldn't have fled to Argentina. He would have fled outside this container of ours, right? But the latest and greatest thing I've heard was it's just funny how, again, and this really correlates to the stuff we hear about the moon missions. The moon missions are impossible with current 1969 technology to 72 technology and probably 2019 technology. So what they do to cleanse it all, to launder the lie, is to say that alien bases were found on the moon and alien, and that appeals to a whole nother idea that we would love to meet someone else in this universe. But because let's face it, it's a lonely universe when you find out that the ignorant masses have allowed tyrannical leaders to control us, and then if you're intelligent, this is happening, you don't want it to happen, but you have to convince everyone that it's happening. When all the educational systems are completely co-opted and propagandized away from modern science, you don't even know Tesla exists until you exit college. And so it's appealing. It's appealing to have the idea that aliens are just right around the corner, and if we just, send up the right smoke signals or leave the right writing in the soil in some Peruvian desert floor, that they're going to go, oh, they want us to land and talk to him now. Oh, okay, let's do it, But the latest story I've heard is that Stalin, man, if there's any place on Earth that wasn't sophisticated, it was Russia at the time of 1947, in terms of this sort of technology. That he had developed an anti-gravity vehicle, that he had been conducting experiments on children to make them look alien-like, and that they flew this craft with these kids inside, which I guess are 3 children, hybrided to look weird. Hybrided with what, I don't know. And that they crashed it to try and create mass panic within the United States of America. Where could he have even conceived of that theory? Well, we're going to go through that just a little bit because there's a bunch of logic missing from the theory. Again, these things get thrown out there like aliens on the moon and we found them. Well, hey, let's just get to the moon first. Let's get a platform that actually works with 1969 technology. Oops, not so much. Well, forget your alien theory unless you're sensing them through telescopes. Stalin, if he had anti-gravity vehicles, think about it. Europe, all democracy. And it's, faux or real, whatever. And that includes England, or Great Britain, Australia, and the United States of America. And so Stalin is sitting there in a communistic bubble trying to fight for the doctrine of communism. He wants to win that doctrine of communism at any cost. You don't think the guy would create a fleet of anti-gravity vehicles and wipe out Europe and take more than just half of Berlin and half of Germany? He would have wiped everything out. In fact, if he was super smart, they were pretty brutal. That dude was really, really brutal. I mean, maybe he would kill absolutely everyone, but he would have... If he's smart, he just has to land inside of Washington, D.C. He needs to land inside of London, Paris, Madrid, and just say, look at me, man. We have 500 of these vehicles with nuclear bombs in them because, man, these things can lift anything. They're anti-gravity, man. It's easy. We can put a smart bomb in there. We can do whatever we want. And we're going to blow you all up if you don't get that, if you don't surrender to me right now, or you're all going to become a communist country. It's a great idea for a video game. But no, he created this craft, put little creatures in it, and the defense mechanism to further the story. I mean, in one level, the writing is not too bad. The writing is not too bad on this little movie they've created to keep the story going. And it's fascinating to me that people do sit at home and craft these stories, or sit in some government think tank to craft these stories to basically disinfo the truth. And what's phenomenal is just, imagine me going into a studio in Hollywood to pitch a film, or go to my agency or whatever, pitch a film, and it's a make or break moment. Yeah, that's pretty good. Why don't you go and write that? Or, no, thank you. We got 5 of those scripts, or we don't. Space is done. Right? We're going to lean off space for the next decade. Okay. But someone is going into a PSYOP commander. What he got on the Roswell disinformation campaign? Oh, we got this idea, it's like Stalin, and he's got flying saucers with genetically modified children. Oh, I love it. Run with it. Okay. But what they said was, because we smuggled in Nazis after World War II, that we smuggled in all these Mengele guys, and we had them also creating hybrid human beings at the same time. Again, hybriding with what? I don't know. We do know that sort of island of, was it Dr. Moreau? That kind of stuff definitely has happened. I guarantee you they have mixed spiders with humans. They have done some crazy crap, probably reptilian lizards with humans, just to see what happened. And a real good example of that is the movie Aliens 4, where Sigourney Weaver goes in the room and finds them trying to industrialize the creation of the crazy alien thing. And she sees all those jars and all those containers of all the experiments that went wrong. Probably somewhere there's that research with a bunch of tanks of formaldehyde and other preservatives containing these pickled experiments for the sake of their research. You just literally have the recipe tied to the jar. Well, 4 parts spider, 1 part earthworm, the rest of it's all human. Boing, there you go. You get that thing right there. The son of the military guy that was sent out to capture a bunch of this debris, who eventually said he, met the alien at the crash. He's the one that made the recording in his 70s. He's got no teeth. He's talking about having talked to the alien. And the crazy thing is, I went up to try and find that video, and I found a bunch of truncated versions of the interview at this location, but they cut the part where he said it told him two things. One, he has conceded that he is stuck here on Earth, and he said he felt really sad. And he said, two, don't worry, no one's coming to get us. And he said it made him so sad. And here's the guy out there walking in the desert at dusk. And you could see he was going through this emotion. He was starting to cry without crying. He was getting the choked up voice, glassy eyes, because he was reliving the emotion. Because he felt sorry for this little guy. But the son of that dude, who's now in his 70s and wrote a book finally, and said, like, I'm writing this book because I'm going to die soon, and I want my story out there. I think he's a physician as well, obviously retired. And his story, just to recap, is that his father drove to the house, got him out of bed, and had a little box of the different types of plastic and steel with the I-beams, the little I-beams with the writing on it, which his father transcribed for us so you can see it on the internet. But he threw it all over the kitchen floor and told his son, this is from a flying saucer. This is from an alien race somewhere out there. You will never see this again because I have to turn this in and they're going to hide it. But I wanted you to see this. Now, contrary to some people retelling that story, they said that the kid was able to, that he attempted the experiment of crushing the steel that then had memory shapes, which we sort of have that today already. It was adults at the bridge game that said that they were the ones that were crushing it up. It was adults the next morning before all the evidence was seized at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. They were the ones playing with it. They were the ones trying to shoot bullets through it and trying to disrupt this foil that was the thickness of the paper on a cigarette, because he used to use zigzags back in the day. In addition to buying, store factory-made ones, they still rolled their own. Just go watch the Maltese Falcon. But he said, look, since the late 70s, all the way up until present day, he goes, he will get a call annually from someone in the government who identifies themselves remotely, meaning not really, the heavy credentials, says, you're the guy that was the son of this dude, right? Yeah. You said you saw the debris, right? Yeah. Now, then they try to brainwash him over the telephone. Now, isn't it really the case that you didn't see an I-beam with writing embedded in the steel that had purple reflections? Isn't it true that you just saw tape from like a game company, like a physical board game company coming out of New York City, and they've even sent him the tape? And he said, now I know what you're trying to do. Conversation over, see you later. But he goes, they've been trying to brainwash me since he was a young man to deny what he saw, to clean up the story. I mean, why he doesn't just play into their hands on the telephone? Oh yeah, probably. You know what? You're probably right. And then just hang up the phone and go, no, you don't need to call me anymore. The tape has been analyzed by a lot of people who saw the real thing, and they said, look, this has nothing to do with that tape. The tape, just so that you know, is a very flowery tape. It's flowers, and the tape had the flowers had like whole, it was all outlines, like a coloring book. Whereas the I-beam with the purple print on it was embossed. And it's like, for those of you who've ever collected art or you're a welder, when you disrupt metal with heat, you get this sort of petroleum look because it changes the frequency of light reflecting off of the outer layer of the steel. It used to be a big thing in the 80s to get jewelry that had been, treated by a blowtorch. But he said it looked nothing like the stuff that I saw. And again, what's interesting is this I-beam with this print on it seemed to be decorative. And you can look it up online. You can look up the guy's sketch online. Hey, try to crack it, be a little hieroglyph translator. But I was just recalling this whole thing to a friend of mine. And when I really, because one thing I never learned was that Roswell was this I keep saying hot air balloon, weather balloon, spy, covert Air Force base. The division was made out of these people. And it's just good to remember that the dude who gathered up all this stuff, put a bunch in the back of his pickup, had a little box full of it. When he was supposed to be running a bridge game that night, he failed to show up because of the call, but he did show up. And the guy that ended up running the bridge game that night, who was like, I swear to God, this guy was in his late 70s to mid 80s recalling this story. What's the guy have to do to lie? I mean, he has no motivation to lie whatsoever. He said, look, he came in with his box. He told us what he found. We all looked at it. We all have incredibly technical backgrounds, and we definitely have all knowledge about weather balloons. Nothing existed in the world in weather balloon research, construction, or deployment that these individuals, including some women, at this bridge game. And he says, he's shown them the box. It's got a couple different plastics and 3 or 4 different metals. And they're fascinated, and they're happy. They're happy that this was discovered. And so he said, that's nothing, man. You got to come out to my truck. I got a ton of this stuff, big pieces. And so they all went out to his truck. All right. And they were convinced that this was real. And that guy talked about the next day going to work, and everyone's looking at the box of stuff that's sitting on a desk in this kind of big room. And he said by, again, 1 o'clock or so that afternoon, black suits showed up. Everyone had to sign the Secrecy Act, which they already were on a Secrecy Act, but they had to sign one that was 50-year Secrecy Act before they could talk about it, which is kind of funny. People were murdered who were just secondhand folks as well as firsthand folks. The poor secretary woman who was watching the desk at the Air Force base or the hospital. I think it was the hospital where they were doing the autopsy of these 2 that died. The story goes that someone came to her and said, hey, you want to see something? Come on down the hallway. They took her down the hallway. Stay in the door jamb. Now watch this. They walked deep into the room, open a sheet, and go, right there. That is an alien from another planet. Boink. Now, what's really interesting about Whitley Strieber's book called Majestic, the way the book is written is that he claims, he's trying to be alluring at the same time he's trying to be mysterious. He says that he arranged a meeting with someone who was deep involved in this Project Majestic, aka the Roswell crash. I got the paperback from a grocery store, and it was beautiful. The cover was all foil, so it had, like aluminum on the front kind of thing, right? And it was like a sprawled out gray on the ground. But he said he met with this old man in the motel, and that, which is kind of ironic because a lot of the interviews of these individuals who claim to have been a part of these programs, it's always in some little motel. But way back in 1989-90, Whitley Strieber was saying that the aliens looked like hybrided children. And he took it a whole nother route. He said that Truman created the Central Intelligence Agency as a direct result of Roswell. Kind of funny. Those of us who follow Skull and Bones know that that's probably categorically not true. But then what Whitley was going into in the book, if I remember it right, was that there were a tremendous amount of unexplained pregnant women losing time and finding themselves like walking home from some place because America was safe back in the day. I think the last one I remember very vividly, it's probably the scariest one in his book, is a woman that's like, I don't know, she's 6 to 9 months pregnant. She's walking home, probably not 9, but she was abducted. Her baby was taken from her by them. And that she ended up, he prints like articles and stuff in the book He even prints what he claims to be the autopsy report from the Gray. Again, I think the first one was so damaged that there wasn't a heck of a lot you could get off of it, but the second one was fairly intact physically, but damaged enough that it died. And the third one supposedly lived a long time, and there's all kinds of stories about him having a name, them taking care of the guy. But he's printing these articles that these women were known to be pregnant by their OBGYN, and all of a sudden, miraculously, the baby's gone. And, delivering a child after 6 months is going to be a hell of an ordeal, and probably not something a woman's going to just say, oh, it just disappeared. Now, consequently, when he was writing his other 3 books, which was Communion, Transformation, and Breakthrough, I believe in that order, he really communicated that he was a chosen one and that he was being abducted constantly, and that as part of his abduction, of course, he's the one that really launched the anal probe thing. And again, think it through for a split second, people. There's nothing that can be gained through that methodology that couldn't be gained through every other means that didn't involve such a thing. I constantly joke he may have had another love in his life that that little story covered for it. No, I'm not engaged in any other rest area activity. It's aliens that are doing it. Sure, yeah. But he said that routinely an alien would come in, fondle him in a particular way to arouse him, and then within seconds he climaxed and produced, obviously, his side of the genetic pool, so to speak. And, they wanted his stuff. Okay. You could probably follow around the average 12-year-old and get the same thing, right? He also claimed that, inside these vehicles after his abduction, he would see all kinds of people in there with him, male, female. I don't know if he ever said that there were young people or not, but his insinuation was that they were harvesting reproductive materials from humans and then, conducting experiments. And what's really weird about that, for me personally, is that you have this supposedly, obviously, claim that there's hyper-intelligent beings out there that want to genetically splice us, and that they are engaging in probably one of the most risky plans on Earth to do this. I mean, this is going to sound like I'm joking, but I'm not joking. How many people routinely go to sperm banks? How many people, if asked by their government, whether they be a covert government employee, Q clearance employee, or anything, you can put a Craigslist post on. Hey, we're engaging in fertility experiments. We need a constant source of materials, and we'll pay you for it. You show up. They evaluate you psychologically. The more intelligent you are, they eventually find a professor that's willing to do this, and they lean into the guy really quietly and say, how'd you like to work for us full-time? We'll pay you way more than this college is paying you, and all you got to do is look at girly magazines or whatever turns you on, and your stuff is going to be given directly to an alien race that we have made contact with, such that they can create hybrids, because there's a bigger plan going where we're going to need to be able to live on each other's planets or whatever, realms of existence. Man, dudes would line up left and right. Can't say I would turn it down. And then the females, well, how many women, young girls, do the surrogate mother thing? They are, these, in my experience of talking to my friends that have used surrogate mothers, these are heroes. These are women that go in for a female that's unable to carry a child, and they take their body through a 9-month pregnancy with all the stretch marks, all the ramifications, so that a family can have a child. You know, they are getting compensated for it, but come on. What's your body's, you know, health worth? You know, I mean, again, have them young and you'll bounce back without no one even knowing you had a kid. But I'm sure some of these ladies, you know, they take on some scars for the rest of their life, and God bless them, you know. But I'm sure that they would participate too without all this abduction, right? Without all this anal probing. If you need some cellular tissue from that region of the body, well, how many people do colonoscopies just as a little checksum to then get scanned by oncologists, you know? There's no need for that. Just like there would be no need to mutilate a cow and just leave it there. It happens. I think it's a very man-made thing to check the radioactivity absorption of all the testing that we did. They scoop out the mouth, they scoop out the rectum, and they check to see radiation on lip tissue, soft tissue, and radiation at the exit point, entry point, exit point, and they can do some very basic math on the isotope counts and say, this is the ratio of absorption. One, this is what's still occurring at feeding time from grazing on grass or whatever, and this is what's exiting out the back. So whatever's missing is what's being absorbed by the animal. But now why wouldn't the government just go up to a cattle rancher? I have one in my family, and just buy a cow, buy an old cow, you know, and just take it off and do a test. You don't need to create all this mystery, all this weird mutilation, which then, you know, drums up a bunch of conspiracy theories and fear that can be linked to anything, right? If they're not going to tell us about aliens because we're so fragile, then what are you doing, you know, leaving cattle out in a field all mutilated? That makes no sense. You're not solving the problem, you're creating the problem, right? But it's interesting because, you know, we do have this bizarre Area 51, which just had the recent funny little, you know, thing where everyone was supposed to rush the joint. I'm willing to bet that changed a few things. I'm willing to bet some money was spent that's going to change that whole place. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years, 51 is just dormant. No one's there anymore. Then there's video games that have actually taken it to the next level. I think Deus Ex did a brilliant job where it's all underground. Well, we know there's underground bases. Colorado's Air Force Base goes down into the 20s. There's over 20 floors underneath that place. It's either 23 or 27. I can't remember. But a family member of mine worked there, and she only had authorization to go to 3. All right. It's not like we're all going to crap ourselves because our government has some places that they want to keep safe. I mean, I'm kind of glad that if we ever get this formula right, that someone can't just wipe everything out, that they're like, yeah, we're so far down in the ground, no one can touch us. I think that's good, right? It's so mysterious, isn't it? I mean, it's so alluring to think that we've made contact with some alien race. And, you know, there's all these stories where you have Truman to Eisenhower is really gets interesting. And it gets interesting again with Jimmy Carter. So Truman is supposedly, again, creating the intelligence agency because they have to manage this thing where human beings are having their children stolen and potentially human beings are being abducted permanently. And then you have the stories of Eisenhower. Again, no one can confirm anything. But there's that old man, I think he's got the oxygen tubes in his nose, and he said that he was kind of a mid-tier Q clearance guy who had access to Area 51, but the president didn't have access. I don't believe any president of the United States has been allowed to enter Area 51 once. And you know, I don't know how much I support that. Can't the commander-in-chief go in there? I don't necessarily need to go in there as much as I'd like to. But come on, the commander-in-chief, well, he's sitting inside the war room and he's like, yeah, take that covert aircraft and go deploy it and do this covert thing. But he can't go and visit where it's in the garage, you know, or the new one that's being built. But this guy, and I forgot his name, he said that he went there on behalf of Eisenhower, who said to him, this is the claim from this guy, that he said that Eisenhower said, if you don't let him in, this middleman guy, that Eisenhower's going to put the military right there on the border of 51 and roll over the whole joint and open the whole thing up, and there'll be no more secrets. And so they were like, okay, you can come in. But the guy said he was taken in. I'll get the highlights of the story correct. But he said he went into this facility, and the guy that he was supposed to meet was in a room talking to one of these creatures. These beings. I shouldn't call them creatures, but beings. And they were just having a conversation. Just, how's it going, Bob? Nenu. And I guess they learned how to speak at some point. But he had to wait for that guy to finish the meeting before he was able to have the conversation. And so he finds out that we have this contact with this alien race and takes it back to Eisenhower. And I guess Eisenhower's cool. I don't need to meet these aliens. Imagine you're commander-in-chief and someone says to you, we talk to aliens on a daily basis. They are within our midst. They're nice. We got all these covert programs with them. And the commander-in-chief goes, I'm okay not having any say in this. I'm okay never meeting these things. Jimmy Carter is famous for having, in his first few months in office, as I was told the story, he is flying over 51 or by 51, and he wanted Air Force One to just land right there at 51. They make the radio calls down, and he is denied access, and that was the last of it. Several presidents have talked about their first day in office, really their first 3 days in office. And then in those 3 days, the entire world looks like a different place because they get briefed on what's really going on in the world. Someone told me that actually Barack Obama, of all people, took some interview either in paper or in video, must have been paper, I don't know, and claimed that was like the most sobering moment of his life. I've never been able to find a reference to that, so if anyone's ever heard that story, please link it below, because I would love to read the claims of what he said. And it was nothing related to anything, alien-based, but he's been asked several times, I think, on the Jimmy Fallon show, do aliens exist? And of course, he gives these kind of funny answers. Trump has already said, I think not, but, we'll see. I think that's interesting. There is of course, the ongoing rumor that as soon as they mastered the illusion of landing on the moon, that according to von Braun's secretary, who has a PhD as well, that he warned her that there was a plan to do a fake alien invasion. We've talked about it on the show. I think I did a full episode on it. And, I think the 17 dude has even talked about it. Beware of this claim if they ever try to do it. And look what's going on. In the last 2 years / 3 years, the amount of declassified UFO stuff is starting to just tumble out like crazy. And some of it is like, here's a video of a thing. Totally not from this world. It's intelligently designed. It's intelligently flying around. So obviously it's not some anomaly. And then you have, I think the super faux fake military response. Well, that was not supposed to be released. And, you're not supposed to have that on your computer just to kind of make you want it really bad. And, we all know that art students create lots of fake UFO videos. There's this weird page that someone has, this awful website that I found once, which I bookmarked because it was so awfully good. And they harvest all that stuff. They harvest, CG students doing things. You can just tell, once you play with CG software like I did to make the intro, what the volumetric particle systems can do, what the smoke systems can do. And my God, like I've said to you guys, Blender, which just released 2.81 this week, it's so unbelievable what you can do in your home on a laptop. You could have a 12-inch laptop and create, 4K movies, negatives that no one could deny. But when you really educate your eye, one of the things that you have to do, and I thought about creating an episode where I do it in front of you. I show you how we model something together, and I was thinking about doing it with an episode I've already recorded. I might just do some overlays, but just show you what I did to make the intro. But the big telltale sign, if you educate your eyeball, is called tracking. So you say you create a UFO. You can go out anywhere in the world and just take your camera on your phone, put it at the highest res you possibly can. It's probably a good idea. And then you can just film. Just hold the camera, and you could actually, in your head, go, okay, the way I'm going to do this is the UFO is going to come around that building, hover, and then move really slow, and then zip, it'll go off into space. All right. I'll give you the thumbnail version of how it's done. You just take Blender 3D, which is free at blender.org. Everybody's interested, you get a copy. You upload your phone footage into it. It turns into a frame-by-frame movie. And they have this beautiful video editor inside. Once you've got it in there, then you can go to the first frame, select anything in the frame. You're supposed to select about, I think, minimum of 4 things, but you can select hundreds of things and even have an automatic feature which you'll find. It'll study the video and find everything that's stable and not, like some palm moving or something. And it automatically tracks the shot, meaning it figures out from where you were standing, you moved a little bit with the camera, you panned it in a certain kind of way, and you even tell it how you moved your camera, whether or not you tilted it, panned it, tracked it like a dolly shot where it moved. It figures everything out. And now it's ready for your 3D object. You put your ship where you want it, and you just animate it. You move it from waypoint to waypoint. I want it from here to here in so many seconds. You can rotate it, whatever you want to do. You can do all this kind of stuff. I changed the intro, and no one ever said anything. The UFO now does a little bit of an adjustment before it lands. It's been out there for 5 episodes at least. No one ever said anything. It's kind of funny. But you get your move down. And again, the smaller you make it, the more it's just a little blip of light that's unexplainable. It's even better. And no one can say, well, look at that window. That looks dumb. Look at that thing. It looks dumb. There's too much reflection here, blah, blah, blah. Just make it a white thing. Then once you have it all figured out, the only problem you have is you want it to go behind objects, right? If you really want to get elaborate with it, you could create some wild S-shaped flying pattern where it's going between poles and all kinds of stuff. You can do whatever you want. Because inside Blender, everything's in 3D all of a sudden, and now you have to just make the buildings and every obstacle, flagpole, whatever, a car, just real generically. And then you tell Blender, that's a mask. Subtract that out of the UFO shot that's going to be animated. Sorry, I ran out of lighter fluid. Once you got it all set up, you can scrub the playhead. You'll see it perform the way you want it to perform. You make adjustments. And again, less is more in these shots, right? Less detail. And then you just say render. And that thing will put out either a composite of both layers with your video and the UFO, or you can do the UFO separate. Use Photoshop, or not Photoshop, but Final Cut or Premiere to composite everything together. You can, at that point, if you separate the 2 layers, then you can do color correction on your UFO separately. It's easy, man. It's so simple. And you can shake your camera around and go nuts, and it'll figure it out. However, if you get anything off, if the tracking is off 1 pixel in one frame to another frame, an educated eye will see it. And you can see it without being a big CG expert. You can see it because you see things move every single day. You see planes land all the time, fly by all the time, and they don't kind of float. They're moving in a straight line, and there's nothing that can change that. Save, some horrific situation, right? But there's 2 things that are blowing my mind right now that I think are very wonderfully suspect. One is, again, and I mentioned this a couple times, I want this to kind of start becoming something that you talk about and something you think about, if nothing else, which is, it's like every month now, some meteorite of an exact shape and size is now coming at Earth, and it's going to swing by Earth at this particular altitude, and whatever. It's, it's not a threatening thing. It is a threatening thing. Sometimes they seem to know exactly how high it's going to be, and other times they're like, it might hit Earth. It's one of those kind of things. Usually it's not going to hit Earth 99% of the time in their predictions, because if it did, then you create mass panic. All NASA wants is money from you through a rationale in your mind that you need them to help out, even though there's nothing they could do besides get people evacuated from an area. But, look at the claim of the volcano eruption in Arizona, which they say is a meteorite hitting Earth about the size of a bus. Again, looks just like Diamond Head in Hawaii, which is most certainly a volcano. Crater Lake is a volcano. And it's funny. I can talk to people who are experts, and I say that's not a crater. And they'll go, yeah, it is. It's definitely, they'll say, yeah, it's not a meteorite. Yes, it is definitely a meteorite. And I'm sitting there going, and why do you think that? Well, they told me. And it's like, okay, you haven't been there to see anything. And they might say, well, there's a lot of iron rock everywhere, and that's what meteorites are made out of. All right, maybe. Maybe all the meteorites in the desert, which I told you several times are the clubs that go out and look for it. Maybe all it is volcanic residual. That thing in Arizona blew up so much that it's a mile across, half a mile down, 3 miles around. Diamond Head's even bigger. Whatever made Diamond Head, I think you could probably see it in North America after it exploded. It would have been gigantor. What do you think the bowels of the Earth are? Out over the plasma ball. The crust down there is probably fairly primitive, but it doesn't have a lot of mixture down there and a lot of super heavy particles. If of a complex composite, right? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But the UFO thing is starting to explode. And, again, the insinuation that here we are, I don't know. If you really think of The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is a movie made in 1951 with the War of the Worlds, which did cause problems in 38, but they were telling everybody on the radio that they were here. That's a little bit different than the show you're going to pay to see a movie, right? But, Forbidden Planet, all Ed Wood stuff, all of the space shows that came out of the 60s, and then we've just had space shows since the 60s. We've always had one on TV, but you had Buck Rogers before that, X-1, 2000 plus, radio shows in the 50s. Again, people are tuning into a fictional show. But we're now approaching 100 years of belief in aliens, at least in theory for sure. And they're towing this line that if we learn that they exist, that we're all going to freak out. Who's going to freak out? Who's alive today? Who's going to freak out? I don't think anyone's alive today that'll freak out. What do you think the difference is for, say, an undiscovered tribe in Peru, an undiscovered tribe in, say, the Brazilian rainforest, or in that little island north of Australia? North of New Zealand. What's the difference between them seeing a helicopter land and a UFO land? The only difference would be, and I'm not even sure what I'm about to say is a big difference for these folks. If an alien got out, what do you think a white man looks like to some sort of black culture of man, a race of man that has never seen a white guy before? It's probably around the same thing, as long as they don't shoot death rays and kill people. They always said that Native Americans, when the conquistadors came over in their ships, well, they didn't have anything they could travel on water like that. Big ocean water. Well, they thought they were gods for a little bit, until God was a not so nice dude. Imagine that little funny story. Scientists discover they make first contact with some undiscovered tribe, and they get in there, and all the artwork is all alien stuff, which there are definitely evidence of that in history. But maybe they're just walking around with the aliens. they're tracking alien spacecraft, and they go there, and, where they're used to going into modern societies. Let's just say the fictional stories are actually, let's just say the stories are correct. I shouldn't judge. And I've heard some that are very believable, where you have, modern man finding a UFO, and then, of course, the military guys show up, and this is what happened at Roswell. There was a redhead guy and a black guy. The redhead white guy was completely mean and ridiculous. The black guy was reasonable. And he was like cussing up a storm at a time when that wasn't really, in vogue. But they show up and it's a primitive tribe going, dude, what's your problem? These are our friends. They come from the stars. Look at this little anti-gravity rock I made, If they wanted to learn about us, they'd probably go to some primitive tribe to avoid all the problems. I mean, I think I would, wouldn't you? Having at least one friend who's very well educated and degreed in sort of, geological world history. It's interesting how, the idea that man has only been on this planet for a really short period of time, like 5,000 years. I mean, there's some geologists that think we've only been here in any level of sophistication at Homo sapiens sapien level less than 10,000 years. It's mind-blowing. You're like, what? I mean, we have recorded history in Africa that goes back 40,000 years. But what do they do? And I've warned you guys about this 1,000 times. Probably nearly 1,000 times. The Ice Age. The Ice Age is a genetic mental barrier from allowing yourself to believe that anything existed before the Ice Age. Okay. Isn't that nice? Even though no one ever suggested a glacier ever got to Africa, northern tip of Africa. That's not the way an ice age works, even in their theory. Yeah, in their theory, it gets really cold, and the ice caps really get down, to North America. They swell up on South America and the bottom of Africa. Maybe Australia's all messed up too. But the equator is always warm, right? You have to have 30 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius to maintain ice. And what's really funny about them trying to tell you that the North Pole's melting or the South Pole's going to melt away, it's like, okay, the South Pole of all places is negative 60 Fahrenheit on average. Oh, yeah, so the whole thing's going to swing 92 degrees hotter to subtract the 60 and add 32. And then we're still at freezing. At 32 Fahrenheit, at 90 degrees, 92 degrees up. It's never going to happen, folks. Why does ice crack and fall into the ocean? Well, hell, man, at some point, it structurally can't just continue to grow. It's going to hit water that's a little bit warmer than 32. It's going to melt. But it's a continent, man. It's a continent, whether it's a disk or a continent or island sort of thing. It's still really, really cold, and it's not going to melt away. Right? It's nuts. But what is one of the most alluring questions that man gets? And it's a master's degree, Stanton Friedman, who constantly corrected people, and I know this because of your comments. Dr. Stanton Friedman was not a doctor, and he kept trying to tell people he wasn't a doctor. He had a master's degree in physics. I think it was from Harvard or something. It was a big, he's a smart dude. They were always asking him how long was it going to be before we actually made first contact with aliens in a public sense, right? So they usually answer it in two phases, right? Well, I think we already have because of Roswell and other things. And I think it's going to be, I remember an interview with him on the Sci-Fi Channel and probably the History Channel, maybe even the Discovery Channel, because all three of them touch this because it sells a lot of tickets. They said that, something's going to happen after the year 2000, that we're all expecting paradigm change because of the century turning over. It's just something we all adopt in our minds that, hey guys, let's go to the next level. Don't you want to live in a George Jetson world? Let's go. And so he felt like it was going to happen in his life. And sadly, he passed, I think, either last year or this year. And it didn't happen for him. It's sort of a bummer, man. I feel like if the military ever had that kind of contact, they should have come up to him in his last 5 years or whatever and just said, dude, here's the deal. Well, would you like to work on a secret project And, we'll give you a big cover story. What is some hobby that you have? Oh, I like to make stained glass. Okay, great. So you are going to be on a stained glass expedition. You're going to do some archaeological stuff, and we'll take you down to this other alternate location. We're going to take 3,000 or 4,000 photographs of you, videos of you. We got a whole wardrobe change. We're going to CG your face to grow over a couple of years. But what you're really going to be doing is you're going to be in S4 helping us out with these alien spacecraft. And if nothing else, you're going to get a chance to live your dream. And because you're going to be in such a euphoric state and you're never going home, we don't need to worry about brainwashing you, beating you up, like Bob Lazar said. We're just going to see what you can contribute to the DNA. But it's a one-way ticket, man. You can't go home. I think the guy would take the deal. I think he would take the deal. I hope at some point something like that has occurred for someone, if there truly is, contact that we're working on a daily basis, right? My fear is that because scientists are so left brain in order to achieve their intelligence, that their right brain is not creative. And I know that that's just a worry of mine and probably not a truth. But, it's saddening to see so many disturbingly bad scientific theories go decade after decade, century after century. And you're like, really? Do we really believe this stuff? Because if we're believing a bad paradigm, then we can't engineer a different paradigm. And it's one of these things of course, people say, oh, well, the government has technology way more advanced than you. Well, yeah, I'm sure they do. As I said, though, I believe that due to the internet, due to the proliferation of information, I think that delta, which was always held over our head as like 20 to 50 years, I think 20 is more believable. Of course, they private sector the stuff after a while because they want to make billions of dollars, right? Cell phones are most likely something was probably in pockets in the 70s and maybe early 80s, and then eventually we got the big, gigantic, telephones, and then they went down to candy bars. Maybe they had miniaturization at the military level. Who knows? That's how stuff gets smaller. But that's such I heard a friend of mine, I just talked to a friend of mine yesterday, and he was talking about that differential in technology because he has family members that are, pretty high clearance folks, and they were telling him, you have no idea the technology that we know about, and we are fairly certain that even we just have a tiny breadcrumb of what is being used over our heads. Maybe. I still have a bit of a problem believing that because, you have, evil people running the world. And I don't know if they're, you be evil over there and suppress the people. Try to get this whole freedom thing dissolved, right? We need a one world government thing. Meanwhile, we're over here flying around the galaxy. Again, if they had covert technology that could get to the moon with a payload, we would not be sitting here with crappy photographs of bad-scaled Apollo lunar lander kickstands at 4x their scale on the surface of the moon because NASA couldn't figure out how to forge it properly, right? And for those of you who don't know, you'll think, oh, we did go to the moon because there's photographs of the moon landings, and they have little rover prints everywhere, and they have the kickstand to the lunar module, the part that was left behind. All right. Well, one, the top part of the lunar module is going to crash down on the moon somewhere. They should have that too. But the scale was wrong. When they asked NASA how big is a pixel on this piece of paper, on this image, they gave them a scale, and then when they used that scale to figure out how big the kickstand was, it was 4 times the size. And it was like, well, this is a forgery then. You've lied to us once again. But if they had technology to get to the moon, they'd take the payload up there. They'd lay it down. They'd terraform the joint. And then they'd take a picture of it and go, there you go. They'd take a rover, finally. There's no American rovers on the moon. Seriously, come on. Give it up, right? But they'd drive it over and take a look. And believe me, they could create it exactly the same way as we see it in the photographs, right? But we don't have that because they don't have that. Real simple. So the most popular theory as to why, there's an S4, let's just say Bob Lazar is telling the truth, which I don't believe he is. And, for those of you who didn't watch the first episode of season 5, the major contingency with Bob Lazar is that he said he had 2 degrees, one from MIT and one from Caltech. And because those degrees would take time to achieve, one would have a whole portfolio of photographs and paraphernalia from that school. You don't just go to those schools and not take a picture, right? If you live in Massachusetts for 3 years to 4 years or 2 years or whatever, you're going to take a picture. Same thing with Caltech. He was the only evidence he ever went to Caltech is someone said they gave him a ride to Caltech one day. All right, big deal. It's just here in Pasadena, man. I can take you to Caltech from my house. Doesn't mean you got a degree there. Like I said, I lived at Stanford University for the last probably, 3 or 4 years. I was in the Bay Area once I discovered their library, and I was like, oh my God, step aside. I started buying their academic books, taking them home. Sadly, I've donated already, but be nice to show them on the show, right? So, that's what breaks his story right in two. Why lie about that kind of thing? Plus, his life history is fairly well photographed because he was into turbine engine drag race cars, which he built and raced in front of people to make money. He also made a database for a whorehouse so they could track license plates to make sure that those who came up to the whorehouse were evaluated for whether or not they were police officers or not. So, the guy's got an interesting past. I think he's a cool dude. I like the guy. I wish I could meet him and talk to him. My skepticism of his story is probably what will prevent that from ever occurring. But I would love for him just to go, oh yeah, you know what? It's funny you mentioned that. I've never proven I had these degrees. Here's my alumni shirt. Go ask the college. This was made in 1981 or whatever. Here's all my photographs of my apartment and my friends. And then boom, he's back on track. He's not telling tall tales. But he's good for the brain, in my opinion, because he gets us to think. But according to his story of the sports model UFO that he worked on, which is 1 in 9, again, his story changed. His first story was that the other 8 were all damaged, that they had suffered either a crash injury or we shot one out of the sky or whatever. And the sports model was one that was perfect. And he said, look, maybe we made the one that I'm looking at that's really nice. But one thing he clarified on Joe Rogan was that he said that, a couple things he said that were very interesting. One, he finally said in the 21st century, in his reemergence, which I'm very glad he came back out and talked to us. I think that was great. And again, his beautiful explanation of element 115 was a real treat. Regardless if he's making this up, man, the guy's good. He should just write movies or books or something. But anyway, or be an advisor at least on something like that. But he said he heard that, that what he was working on and where these ships came from was an archaeological dig, that they were man-made, but that we lost some advanced civilization, which again always poses the question of, okay, let's say that happened to us. And again, there's an amazing special on Discovery, which interestingly enough, my uncle, who's an eye doctor, was an eye doctor, he's now retired, he obsessed on this documentary, which I was very impressed with because it was a side of him that I'd never seen before. It was really cool. But the documentary was what would happen to all of man's inventions if we let him sit. Man was gone and everything sat for 10,000 years. What would New York City look like? And the people that contributed to the documentary claimed that in 10,000 years, New York, LA, any big city with skyscrapers would dissolve back into the ground. But that the only thing that would survive would be stone, like a pyramid, like a Stonehenge. Maybe the Arc de Triomphe has enough stone in it. Maybe some of the cathedrals have enough stone in it they wouldn't fall apart, or at least there would be something left to see, like a Colosseum sort of thing, right? But the other thing he laid down was that it was his opinion that they pull these craft out about every 10 years and they go get the greatest minds of the era and they look at it and they say, look, we got it to this stage 10 years ago. Now you have studied whatever, division of physics or whatever, and can you figure it out now? Right? It'd be nice to have a whole troop of ethereal scientists in there. Because that's what I think Bob Lazar is lamenting about, whether or not he realizes it or not, right? So I think that's kind of interesting. But there's the big question beyond the obvious sort of conspiratorial answers of someone trying to keep the technology only for their purposes, of why they hide it. Why not bring it out and have a world contest? Here's an antimatter. They don't even bring the whole thing out. They just bring one of the hanging engines in the bowels of the ship, right? Which, again, according to some researchers and anthropologists, they have found schematics of ships that match the exact description, maybe not the outer fender shape, but the exact description of what Bob talked about. And maybe Bob, in fabricating his story, if he did, saw those in the 70s and just went for it, just talked about it and got his story straight. And again, you're looking at a guy that would love for Bob to be completely 100% honest and true. It's hard yet to prove that in my mind. But either it's one of two things, or maybe both. What if they could take one of these things apart? Once they figure out how to synthesize 115, if that is truly a piece of the engine, but they open it up and they're like, oh my God, it's got about 4 parts in it. And all the metal that's inside this thing, we now know how to make it. We know how to make the little tiny wires and the pinballs inside, right? The ball bearings or whatever. Whatever's inside one of these engines, they're like, okay, the problem is this is really easy to make. And a great design and a great engineering feat would be to make it so simple that it could be built by anyone. And I always try to remind people, look at the World War II movies of housewives going into Lockheed Martin factories, or it wasn't called Lockheed Martin back in the day, but these B-52s that they help make, these B-1 bombers and all this, whatever it is, right? B-52, B-57, and they were able to make them. Well, are they aeronautical engineers? No. Do they know exactly how all the lift happens on the shape of the wing? Not at all. Do they even know what the computers do with the joysticks and stuff? No. But they're told hook wire from red to blue, A to B, 1 to 2. It's like drawn by by numbers. So say America at whatever expense it took launched a clandestine intelligence operation to steal these schematics from everywhere in the world, out of museums, out of people's houses, out of universities, out of the ground, to make sure no one can get this stuff, the schematic on how to do it. Plus they have the craft that was either dug up or crashed. And their whole purpose is they don't want someone even more evil than them to be able to make a whole fleet of these things and wreak havoc on the world. Thus, they lose their control. Maybe it's a combination of both elements, Pardon the pun. Have you ever wondered if something like District 9 happened, or Independence Day, where a mothership came down and just went right over New York City or right over Los Angeles or Paris or London or whatever, and they started to attack us? Have you ever wondered, with all these rumors about, our government's having technology way over our head, if they have weaponized this technology in the form of craft, real spacecraft, anti-gravity engines, whatever type of guns they might have, and that we would be witness to our side fighting back with stuff we've never seen before, with a whole secret fleet of pilots that we've never seen before. And all of a sudden, we look up at the sky, and then all of a sudden there's this huge space battle going on in the air. And we don't know who the hell's friend or foe. Do they have American flags on them, Russian flags on them, Chinese flags on them? Where are these things coming from? Imagine if that was the next Mars Attack movie. They land on Earth, and all the ships have American flags on them. And, as much as we have wreaked havoc on the world in the name of banking cartels, the world, at this point, we're really peaceful. We're jumping out of all the wars. We're no longer being this police state for the whole planet. Thank God. They give the Nobel Prize to a guy that keeps it going, and they crucify the guy that's actually stopping it. Isn't that funny? Boy, truth is stranger than fiction, right? But here come all the ships landing, and they're all alien ships, but they were smart enough to say, we're going to put insignia on the ship which gives psychological trust to the human beings that see them. And they come out, and they just blow everybody away. Wouldn't that be fucking hilarious? I'd be really interested in your opinions about all this stuff. And I hope you guys make it to the end of these episodes, because that's when I asked the question, because I built up my case. I built up the questions for your mind, plus a lot of fodder to think about. And I dearly hope that if I could ever be a fly on the wall at your home, at some public gathering with your good friends who will really listen to you and you respect you, that you are just barfing out these subjects, all of them. Hey guys, you ever thought about this? Boom, 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 boom. And harvest all their answers. And then because your mind is nicely massaged on a weekly basis, you're just connecting dots and coming up with bigger and better theories. The thing is if we ever did make contact with aliens, and let's just do a little scenario here. 2020 is a pretty cool year, right? 2 even numbers buttered up together. Kind of feels good, right? 2019 is gonna. But let's say our alien friends, whoever has the closest proximity to us, let's just go with the Greys, because they seem to be pretty popular these days. January 1st, for the Northern Hemisphere, in the cold of winter, Southern Hemisphere, middle of summer, here comes enough craft to land in at least every capital city of every single major country in the world. Hell, maybe every country in the world. Who knows, right? They've done their geology and geography, and they've figured out where all this is, and they land. So January 1st becomes this day in infamy, this day in history where, oh my God, we all have to just roll over and think this thing through again. Well, the listeners of Deep Thoughts would be like, I got to get to Facebook right away, But what would be, and I have a whole episode about meeting an alien, and it's a really important episode because I slow down the psychology of you physically meeting one. How your brain would interpret seeing one get out of a vehicle. And I just slow time all the way down. Go to deepthoughtsradio.com and search on it. Look in the alien category and you'll see it. But just type in the word meeting and you'll find the episode very quickly and watch it. Okay, so think about it. You're in some government think tank contributing all of your psychological DNA and sociological DNA. For those of you who are religious, the religious DNA. For those of you who are atheists, your atheist DNA. And what does January 2nd look like? And 3rd, and 4th, and the 15th, and the 31st. And then what does February look like? What's going to happen? What's going to happen in your local church? What's going to happen in your local Walmart? The Capitol building where your government does business, the Parliament, the EU headquarters, the UN. What's it going to look like? What's the farmer going to say in the middle of Kansas, Hutchinson, Kansas, the center of the United States of America? What are they going to say? It's a very interesting thought process, right? It's going to be like the guy in Total Recall that's riding on the subway car, or at least the train, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he's looking out the window. He sees the pyramids on Mars, and the dude goes, "Hey, you like it, right? Yeah, well, we used to work there until they found alien shit in it." "Oh, yeah? Oh, wow." And the guy, just blew it off after a while. I was like, yeah, they found alien stuff in it, and no one's surprised. So what's going to happen in 2021, January 1st? 1 year later, how does the world operate? Do they create new classes in K through 12? New classes in college? Do we do an exchange program? Maybe they say, well, you can't really fit in our vehicles and you probably can't breathe, the atmosphere that we have there. It's taken us forever to figure out how to exist in your realm. Maybe they're interdimensional. It's even weirder. All right. Here's what I don't think is going to happen, because that's kind of valuable too. It's sort of like when you have someone you want to eat dinner with, a loved one, and you say, where do you want to eat? Nah, I don't know. And you say, you want an Italian? Nah. You want barbecue? No. And so you find out, okay, let's do a process of elimination. Let me just name everything to me you don't want to eat. I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't want this. Well, in the end, you actually have what's left, and you can pick from what's left. There's not that many choices in America, believe it or not. Depending on where you live, of course. What I don't think would happen worldwide would be chaos. Some areas of the world might have damage control. For those who still think that the Pope is God on earth, presiding over all the pedophile rings in this planet, that dude's going to come out and say, see, I told you so. And Jesus says that they're this, and God says they're that. I meditated last night, I got this, he's going to try to spin it and control it. He's going to try to maintain his empire, his pyramid-structured empire of control. Governments are definitely going to do the same thing. But the reason why you still need to pay taxes is this, this, and this. The reason why you have to go to war and kill someone on the other side of the planet is because of this. The reason why everyone's still racist is because of this. The reason why this party's bad and this party's good is still because of this. Well, they're going to try to maintain control. But what if, just like in Hong Kong, God bless them, no, they're tired of it all. Just to digress for a split second in this huge psychological paradigm shift thinking, China's really the only country on planet Earth that is still trying to say that a worn-out method of ruling the world called communism is still a good thing when everyone else has moved on. But supposedly they're a giant intellectual threat to the rest of the world. Oh, really? Really? What kind of mind can believe that communism is good? I don't know if I'd throw a big IQ at that species. Hong Kong has moved on. They've been blessed by democracy. And whether it be faux democracy or real democracy, it's the right direction. By them fighting and fighting and fighting. And of course, no one can support everything everybody does in a protest, but the overall gist is the elections are coming in, record voting. Looks like, there's a virus over there. It's a mental virus. It's mental technology. Go see my episode of Mental Technology. It's going to bleed into mainland China. It's already happening. I got friends who work over there who are Americans, and they're like, none of the kids buy this shit. They're all just counting the days for the old guys to die. Wasn't it Charlie Chaplin who said in his great dictator speech, as long as men die, freedom will prevail? Something to that effect. Maybe he said democracy, I can't remember. But one of our listeners posted a really good reply to something I put on Facebook on my personal page. Because I posted, I got a few seconds left on the cigar, I'm going to go for it. Charlie Chaplin, by March of 1941, before Pearl Harbor was orchestrated to get us into World War II, made a movie about being a Jewish barber who just happened to look enough like Hitler that he was mistaken for Hitler at one point. And at the crescendo of the movie, in the third act of the old way of writing, he's pushed up in front of a podium. Here he is, a Jew. He's in a neighborhood that's being completely brutalized by Nazis, and it's a brilliant film. It's his first talkie film. I think it might have been his last, too. But he gave this speech that will go down in history as probably the best speech ever given to mankind to fight against the tyranny of our day. And so I love it. I think it's one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. And the one that's the best is the one that actually has a lot of editing on top of it, showing what he was saying as being true. But one of our listeners replied and said, did you know that this guy was accused of being basically a pedophile? Now, Charlie Chaplin, right after he did that movie, was implicated in a bunch of stuff. Something to do with price regulations and some other federal thing that he was involved in, and they made him run to, I believe, Sweden or Switzerland, one of those two countries, and he hid there until the 70s when he came back and got his Lifetime Achievement Award. But of course, when they're out to get you, they're out to get you. They were also out to get Lincoln because he betrayed the bankers during the Civil War and printed the greenback. Thank you, Dave, for my 2 $5 bills. I got it. Dave gave me 2 $5 bills, one with the red seal on it, one with the green seal on it. I keep them on my fireplace mantle so I can make the point to my friends that come in. One's sovereign and one's fiat. Your money has green on it because it's all fiat. The red ones are sovereign. I don't even know how he got these things. But, they've said that, Lincoln's wife was a total nutcase and he had all these flaws, and they're going to attack this guy until everyone hates Lincoln. That's just the banker attack on this guy. Well, the banker attack on Charlie Chaplin was that he had kids in his movies, and so now the guy's long gone. And they're saying that, he would keep these kids next to him and he would do all this sexual stuff with them. Now, he may have been a little kinky on the side. There's some testimony from a divorce settlement that he was pretty kinky and he wanted his wife to be with another woman. That's just what people do when they're famous. Maybe he did that. Don't know. I know that when you talk to a divorce attorney, they will go for the jugular, whether or not it's true or not. And I'll give you an example to kind of filter this into the equation. When I found out that my daughter's mother was pregnant, we weren't married for a very specific reason. I wanted to be a good dad right from the very beginning. So before she was even born, I wanted to give her child support. And so, because we were best friends, but I went to the attorney who I didn't realize was about to retire, and he was giving me a free consultation just at the end of his shift. He had his own law firm, so it was just him inside this building. And I mentioned the circumstances to him, and this guy goes for the jugular. This guy's like, we'll frame her so many different ways to Sunday. Oh my God. I mean, he was like thinking that I hated this woman and that she was trying to extort money out of me. And I'm listening to this barrage of rehearsed falsehoods that this guy was going to put on the mother of my child. And I finally looked at the guy and I said, the only information I got out of him was, you want to make more money in life than you need so that you never have to worry about your bills. That was the only thing he said at one point that I was like, oh, that's a good idea. That's sort of where I am now, but it's a good idea. But so when I saw that, I was like, wow, you can't trust attorneys, man. They're going for jugular, it's just crazy. But I think he was 19 and he married a 17-year-old for his first wife. And then I think he was 29 when he married a 16-year-old. And this is a long time ago, folks. This is in the first half of the 20th century when girls got married for anywhere from 14 and up. It's a pretty common thing, especially the more rural you were. Hey, you menstruated. They just thought, hey, you can have kids. Let's do it. And it wasn't, God, you go back 50 years before that, the late 1800s, and man, it was 45-year-old guys marrying 15-year-olds. It was not, frowned on by society. So if society doesn't have a moral code against it, then you're going to do it because it's just the way it is. And today we have figured out that, especially with the perversion of adults today, it's not a good idea. All right. So the story's a little, it needs perspective. Let's just put it that way. Now, maybe the guy was totally a weirdo. I don't know. But he's going to be attacked until he is pounded into the ground. As long as we forget his name, they'll let him go. But we're never going to forget his name, so they're going to continue coming after the dude. But anyway, that speech is great. And the point he made was, as long as these old guard dudes die, which is an inevitable consequence of being a human being, that anything that you're dealing with right now in society will erase itself. But you have to train the young kids, which they have figured out, of course, to want freedom, to want, their sovereign rights of the republic. You exist, therefore you get these rights, and no one can take them away from you. Kind of an odd ending to this episode, but there you go. Hopefully it's valuable. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. You have to put radio on the end, by the way. It's got all the episodes. It's every episode that's been remastered as well. You won't find season 1 on this channel. It's over on a different channel. But if you go to the website, you just see the videos right where they're wherever they are in the world. I'll make sure you find them. But there's a link for season 1 on there in case you want to see it. I'm starting to get that question. But there's 2 video options. Again, YouTube, everybody knows. BitChute, BITCHUTE. There's a link to it up there, right to my channel. I don't need you to necessarily watch them up there, but I need you to go up and make an account. If you could subscribe, please do. You don't ever have to go back until maybe YouTube blocks everybody with good content. You're going to wish you've been on, you were on that. Now, here's the bummer. If you don't go over there and make an account and they go out of business and this channel on this particular platform of YouTube gets censored so badly that my channel gets shut off because it's not commercially viable, then, you may forget the URL. You may forget the name of the show. So please go over there and subscribe as fast as you can. There's all the options for podcasts. Just take your device over there and click the link. It'll hook you up. There's 3 social media. Facebook, which is a locked Facebook group. It's a great group of people. Definitely get in there. It'll make your day every day you wake up. The stuff on there is a lot of funny stuff, great conversation. We have listeners just go up there. Tim, you're awesome. He goes up there and just puts in a paragraph and goes, let's have a conversation. He just throws a nice thing out. Everyone's doing it now. It's great. So that's awesome too. So get in there and contribute your DNA. And because you can introduce us to something that's never been discussed on the show, or you find I've done 10 episodes on it. Either way, it's a win-win, right? The other one's Twitter. Twitter's getting a little bit more traffic, but the other one is a competitor to Facebook called Minds.com, MINDS.com. It's a competitor to Facebook in that it is censorship free. It's also way prettier than Facebook. So that might be another place you create an account. The link to the page is right on the website, so you get hooked up. Again, just do the subscription. Get a membership or get yourself an account. They don't bother you with any email alerts or anything unless I post into that forum and you get a notice. So it's cool. There's a whole link of ways to contribute to the show. So there's Patreon, which is what everybody uses. You put a little bit of money in, put $1 in. You get all these episodes before everyone else. Right now, Patreon users have 2 episodes you've never seen before. They get it first, right? About 85% of the time. Then there's PayPal. We've had some contributions there. Thank you so much. And there's 2 products I want you to have because one of them cuts off the deep state beautifully, which is Brave.com, Brave browser. Go up and get it. There's an affiliate link, but I don't make any money from it, so don't worry about it. The other one is Backblaze backup software. Please make an account on that. It's $7 a month, 1-year backup, infinite drives, 2 computers. It's a beautiful thing. So hopefully you were entertained by this episode. Thank you so much for visiting. Thank you for all the comments, all the contributions. It's awesome. Until the next episode, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you on the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.